His voice was smooth, calm, but there was an underlying arrogance I couldn't ignore. "If you don't like it here, there's the door," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. I sat there in the sterile conference room, my hands trembling slightly as the CEO of the company, Peter Manning, leaned back in his chair. And just like that, the man who had promised me so much, the man who had sold me the dream of a career I thought I could build for the rest of my life, had just handed me my fate. It wasn't a handshake or a warm goodbye. It was the dismissal of someone he once valued, as if I were nothing but an inconvenience. That day was supposed to be a victory for me. I had just completed a major project, something I had poured months of sweat and hard work into. But the praise, that came in the form of a quick, dismissive nod, followed by a cold, abrupt meeting where my future was tossed aside like yesterday's trash. I was humiliated. Let me back up and tell you who I am. My name is Bianca, and I'm a 33-year-old woman who had worked for Manning Enterprises for almost 10 years. I started as an intern and worked my way up. I wasn't just any employee, I was the one they called in when they needed someone to handle the tough stuff. My problem-solving skills, the way I thought outside the box, those were things I'd always been proud of. I loved my job and I believed in the company. I had a good reputation among my colleagues, and I had invested everything into what I thought was a long-term future with this company. But in that moment, when Peter told me to leave, something inside me snapped. I had been given nothing but disrespect from the moment I walked in that door, but I was done letting him treat me like this. I knew I wasn't the only one. There were others who had come before me, people who had built their careers from the ground up, only to be discarded without a second thought. And yet, there I was, no longer an employee, but something else. Something far more dangerous to Peter Manning's empire. It wasn't just the firing. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was what happened after. You see, what Peter didn't know was that I had been recording the entire meeting. Every word. Every dismissal, every arrogant glance. I had documented everything. I had a secret weapon, one that would change the game completely. You're probably wondering why I didn't just walk out and find another job, right? Why didn't I take the high road, move on, and get over it? Let me tell you something. This wasn't about getting another job. This wasn't just about losing a position. This was about something much bigger. I was going to make Peter Manning pay for every ounce of humiliation he'd put me through, and I was going to do it in a way that no one saw coming. But how? How could someone like me, an ordinary employee, turn the tables on a corporate giant like him? The answer was simple. I would use the one thing he underestimated the most, his own arrogance. And as I sat there, staring at the recording on my phone, I realized that this was only the beginning. Peter had made the biggest mistake of his career. He had no idea what was coming for him. Do you think I was overreacting? Or do you think Peter had it coming? Stay tuned, because the real story is just getting started. The hours after the meeting passed in a blur. I sat at my desk, the sound of my fingers typing away on the keyboard filling the silence, but I wasn't really working. My mind kept racing, replaying every moment of that meeting. Peter's smug expression, the dismissive tone in his voice, how easily he threw me aside. I couldn't let that slide. I couldn't just let it go. "You okay?" Amelia, my colleague and one of the few people who knew what had really been going on behind the scenes at Manning Enterprises, leaned against my desk, her eyes filled with concern. "Yeah, just processing," I muttered, trying to focus on the screen in front of me. But I couldn't. All I could see was that arrogant smile of Peter's. "You're not really thinking about doing something, are you?" Amelia asked softly, her voice laced with skepticism. She had always been the cautious one, the voice of reason. "I mean, he's the CEO, Bianca, you're already out, what more do you want?" I turned to her, a quiet fire igniting in my chest. "It's not about more, Amelia. It's about making sure he can't do this to anyone else. It's about justice." She didn't respond right away, her eyes scanning my face, probably trying to gauge if I was serious or if this was just a temporary moment of anger. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the same way I felt torn at that very moment, but I wasn't going to back down. "I thought you were one of his favorites," Amelia continued, frowning. "I thought you were untouchable." "That's what I thought too," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "But I was wrong, and now I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." I paused, the weight of what I was saying sinking in. It wasn't just about Peter, not anymore. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was about standing up for myself, and for everyone he'd treated like this over the years. I wasn't the only one who had been cast aside by him. There were others, People like Rachel, the receptionist, who had been working here since the company's early days. People who had dedicated their lives to manning enterprises and were dismissed when they no longer fit the company's image. "Are you planning to sue him?" Amelia asked, her voice edged with disbelief. I smiled grimly. That's one way of putting it. But that wasn't the whole plan, not by a long shot. I had something else in my back pocket. The recording, the one that would expose Peter for what he really was. A manipulative, self-serving monster. But I needed more. I needed to build a case not just against him, but against everything Manning Enterprises stood for. Later that evening, I met up with Rachel. She had been a quiet witness to Peter's manipulation over the years, but like many others, she had remained silent. She had been a loyal employee like me, until she was suddenly discarded without reason. "Rachel," I said, my voice low, "I know you've seen the way Peter treats people. He's done it to all of us one way or another." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, glancing around before nodding slowly. "I have, but I never said anything. You know how it is. You keep your head down, you do your work, and you hope for the best. Peter doesn't tolerate complaints." "I know," I replied, "but you know what? I'm done with that. I'm done with sitting in the shadows while he plays God. I have a recording, his words, his threats, everything. I'm going after him." Rachel's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything at first. She hesitated, as if weighing the consequences. "Bianca, that's dangerous. Peter will fight back, he'll bury you." "I know," I said, locking eyes with her. "But this is bigger than him. This is about all of us. We need to take him down." Rachel swallowed hard, then nodded. "Okay, I'll help. I know some things. There are others who won't say anything now, but they will when they see what you're doing." "Exactly," I said, feeling a sense of resolve settle over me. "This is just the beginning." As I walked away from the meeting with Rachel, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. The pressure was mounting, and I knew that taking down someone like Peter wasn't going to be easy. He was powerful. He was ruthless. He would stop at nothing to protect his empire. But what he didn't know was that I was no longer the same woman who had been humiliated and dismissed that afternoon. I was someone else now, someone ready to take back everything I'd lost and more. That night I sat in my apartment, the recording of Peter's words playing in a loop on my laptop. It was all right there, the damning proof I needed. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed to get more documents, emails, anything that would show how Peter had manipulated people over the years. I would take every piece of evidence, every small detail, and turn it into something that no one could ignore. And as I sat there, the realization hit me, this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about exposing the truth. And when that truth came to light, Peter Manning wouldn't know what hit him. But was I ready for the fallout? Would everything I had worked for come crashing down in the process? I couldn't afford to hesitate. The plan had already begun, and there was no turning back now. The days after my conversation with Rachel passed in a blur. I spent every waking moment gathering information, meticulously piecing together every tiny shred of evidence that could bring Peter down. The walls of my apartment became a war room. Files, printouts, and notes were scattered everywhere. It was overwhelming, but I knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about my pride or revenge anymore. This was about exposing the truth. But even as the weight of my plan grew heavier, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of doubt. What if it all backfired? What if Peter found out? What if my actions ruined everything I had worked for, my reputation, my future? But then I thought about Amelia and Rachel. About all the people Peter had thrown aside without a second thought. The ones he'd crushed under his boot for daring to question his authority or outshine him. And I realized I couldn't let him get away with it. Not anymore. One night I met with Amelia again. She was my sounding board, my voice of reason, even though I knew she still didn't fully understand the depth of my plan. "You really think you can do this?" Amelia asked, her voice cautious, but there was a note of respect in her words now. She had seen how focused I had become, how meticulous I was in gathering the evidence. "This isn't just about one bad boss, Bianca. You're talking about taking on a whole corporation." "I know," I said quietly, my fingers tapping on the edge of my coffee mug. "But it's not just Peter, it's everything he represents. The way he manipulates, controls, and destroys people. I'm not just going after him, Amelia. I'm going after everything he's built on lies and deceit." She nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing as she processed my words. "And what about the consequences? What happens if this blows up in your face?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment I had no answer. I could already feel the pressure building. There was no turning back, but I couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. I had to keep going or Peter would win. I'm not afraid of the consequences, I replied, my voice firm. I'm done being afraid. Amelia hesitated, then placed a hand on mine. I'm with you, Bianca, but just remember you're not alone in this. We'll make sure you have what you need to take him down. Her support, while hesitant, was enough to solidify my resolve. I wasn't alone, I had people who believed in me, and that made all the difference. The next day, I made my first move. I went to the law office of an old friend from college, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Henry. I had kept in touch with him over the years, mostly for casual chats and the occasional legal advice. But now I needed him for something much bigger. Bianca, Henry greeted me as I stepped into his office, his expression unreadable. What's going on? You've never asked for a meeting like this before. I closed the door behind me, making sure it was shut tight. I need your help, I said, leaning across his desk. I'm going to sue Manning Enterprises for wrongful termination, but more than that, I'm going to expose everything they've done, all of it. Henry raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued, but not quite convinced. You're serious about this, aren't you? I nodded, sliding the flash drive across the table. I have a recording, the whole conversation with Peter, the threats, the manipulations, everything. I have enough to bring him down. Henry hesitated for a moment, his fingers hovering over the flash drive, before he finally picked it up and plugged it into his computer. His eyes scanned the screen as the audio played, and I could see the surprise in his expression. It wasn't just Peter's words, it was his tone, his arrogance. It was undeniable. Well, I'll be damned, Henry muttered, leaning back in his chair. You've got him, Bianca, this is gold. But you're going to need more than just a recording. You need documents, emails, anything that shows a pattern. Something that proves this wasn't just a one-off. I'm working on that, I said, already on edge, my mind racing. But I need to move quickly. Peter's a dangerous man, and I don't know how much time I have before he finds out what I'm doing. You're right about that, Henry said, his voice more serious now. But if you want to take him down, we'll need to be methodical. We can't rush this. I took a deep breath, knowing he was right. I wasn't just fighting for my own justice anymore. I was fighting for everyone who had been wronged by Peter. Everyone who had suffered under his rule. And if I wanted to take him down, I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I had to stay calm, stay focused. I can get you what you need, I said, standing up. I'll be in touch. That night, I went through my emails and files again. I began reaching out to former employees, people who had left the company or been pushed out. I needed their stories. I needed them to come forward to help me build the case against Peter. Slowly but surely, the pieces started to fall into place. If that revenge hit just right, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more epic comebacks and justice-served stories. Drop a comment below. I'd love to know what you would have done in their place. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just about Peter. It was about everything he represented. The toxic culture he had fostered at Manning Enterprises, the lies, the manipulation, the disregard for his employees. I had to make sure this wasn't just a personal vendetta. This was a movement, a fight for accountability. It wasn't going to be easy. But I was no longer the woman who had been humiliated and fired. I was someone else now. Someone who had the power to make a difference. The next morning, as I walked into the office for the first time since my termination, I had one goal in mind: to gather the final pieces of the puzzle. And as I looked around the empty office, I knew it was only a matter of time before Peter's empire would come crumbling down. The morning after my meeting with Henry, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The plan was finally taking shape, and every day brought me closer to making Peter Manning pay for everything he had done. The pieces were falling into place. The recording was secure. I had gathered enough documentation to build a case, and now I just needed to execute the final stages of my plan. It was a cold, gray day as I made my way to the office building that had been my workplace for nearly a decade. It felt surreal, walking back through the glass doors, knowing that this wasn't just another day in the life of an employee. This was my battleground. As I entered the building, I was greeted by a few familiar faces, people who had once been my colleagues, my friends. But now everything felt different. The air was thick with tension. Everyone seemed to be on edge, unsure of what was about to happen. They had no idea what I had been planning, and I wanted to keep it that way for now. I made my way to the HR office. As I stepped into the elevator, my mind raced through the steps of my plan. I was about to confront the company's leadership with everything I had: the recording, the emails, the testimonies from former employees who had suffered under Peter's rule. Everything, but I wasn't just going to expose Peter. That wasn't enough. I needed to make sure that the company understood the cost of their actions, the damage they had done to so many people, the emotional scars they had left behind. This wasn't just about money, it was about accountability. When I reached the HR office, I found Amelia waiting for me, her arms folded, her expression serious. "You ready for this?" she asked, her voice low. "I have to be," I replied, my voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "I've got the evidence, Amelia. Now we just need to make them see it." "I'm with you," she said, her tone resolute. "Just remember, once this goes public, there's no turning back." I nodded, knowing she was right, but I couldn't back down now. Not after everything Peter had done. As we walked into the HR office, I was met with the cold, calculating gaze of Evelyn, the company's HR manager. She was always the one who handled the difficult employees, the ones who dared to question the company's policies or challenge Peter's authority. She had a reputation for being a smooth operator, someone who could twist the truth to fit her narrative. But today, she wouldn't be able to escape the truth. "Bianca," she greeted me, her smile strained. "I didn't expect to see you back here so soon. I thought you'd be busy with other things." "I'm here for business," I replied coolly. "And I think you'll find that business is about to get very interesting." I placed the flash drive with the recording on the desk in front of her, watching as her eyes flickered to it, then quickly back to my face. "What's this?" Evelyn asked, her tone guarded, but I could see the hint of unease in her eyes. "Evidence," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Evidence of Peter Manning's unprofessional conduct. The way he humiliated me during our last meeting, the threats he made. It's all here. Everything you need to know about what kind of man he really is." Evelyn's face remained stoic, but I could see her processing the weight of what I was saying. She didn't react right away, but I knew she was calculating her next move. It wouldn't be long before Peter caught wind of this. But I was ready. I had a plan, and it was going to unfold exactly how I wanted it to. "We're aware of your dissatisfaction, Bianca," Evelyn said, her voice too smooth. "But you have to understand that Peter is an important figure in this company. His decisions are what drive us forward. I suggest you take a step back before things escalate any further." "Oh, I'm not backing down," I replied, my voice firm. "And neither are the people who have been wronged by him. You see, Evelyn, this isn't just about me. This is about everyone he's ever stepped on to get ahead. This is about all of us. And you can't hide behind your corporate jargon anymore. The truth is coming out." Evelyn's smile faltered for a moment, and I knew I had her on edge. But before she could respond, I heard a knock on the door. Rachel stepped inside, her eyes sharp as she took in the scene. She had been invaluable in gathering witness statements from former employees, people who had long since left the company but still felt the scars of their time under Peter's reign. She had made sure they knew they weren't alone. "I've spoken to the others," Rachel said, addressing Evelyn directly. "People who were dismissed unfairly, people who were pushed out when they had nowhere else to go. Bianca's not the only one Peter's wronged. You can try to spin this however you like, but the truth is coming, and we're ready to back it up." Evelyn's face darkened, and she finally stood up, her voice growing more forceful. "You're making a huge mistake. You're threatening the reputation of this company." "No," I said, my voice ice cold. "You and Peter have already done that, but now it's my turn to make sure the world sees who you really are." The silence in the room was suffocating, and I could feel the walls closing in on Evelyn. She knew deep down that she had no way out. She had tried to manipulate the situation to bury the truth, but now the weight of it was bearing down on her. "We have everything we need, Evelyn," I said calmly. "Documents, recordings, testimonies from people who have been harmed by this company's practices. You don't have the power to control the narrative anymore." Rachel stepped forward, adding, "This isn't just about you or Peter. This is about fairness, about holding people accountable. You've both had your time, but now it's ours." Evelyn's face paled, and for the first time I saw her falter. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You're right," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "This is about holding the powerful accountable, and I'm done being afraid." The tension in the room was palpable. I knew that this was the moment, this was the point of no return. Evelyn and Peter might have had the power before, but now I had something far stronger, the truth. As I turned to leave, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. The ball was in their court now, and I had no doubt they would try to fight back. But I had already won. Because no matter what they did, the truth had been set free, and once the truth is out, there's no going back. What would Peter do next? Would he retaliate? Would he try to silence me? I didn't know, but one thing was certain: the war had just begun. The subpoena hit Peter Manning's desk like a thunderclap. I didn't witness his reaction firsthand, but I heard it from an unlikely source: Liam, a mid-level manager who'd spent the past few years trying to stay under Peter's radar. Liam had always kept his head down, avoided office politics. But that morning he texted me just 4 words. He flipped the table. When the legal notice arrived, demanding Peter appear in court for a wrongful termination lawsuit backed by irrefutable evidence, he erupted. Security cameras caught him storming out of the conference room, face flushed, jaw clenched. He yelled at Evelyn, slammed his office door shut, and reportedly sat there for 3 hours, refusing to speak to anyone. Meanwhile, I walked into Henry's office with a quiet confidence. The evidence was filed, the witnesses were ready, and the court date was set. It wasn't just me against Peter anymore, it was a collective voice rising against years of abuse. Henry greeted me with a rare smile. "Bianca, you've got the court's attention. That recording, the emails you found, Rachel's testimony, it's a clean strike. They can't wiggle out of this." He slid a document across the table toward me. "Peter's lawyer offered a settlement," he said. 6 figures, quiet NDA, they want this buried." I didn't even glance at the paper. "No," I said calmly. "He wanted silence when he destroyed my career. He doesn't get silence now." Henry nodded, folding the offer without another word. When the court date arrived, the tension was electric. Peter entered the courtroom flanked by 2 lawyers, his usual cocky demeanor dimmed. He wore an expensive suit and a forced smile, but his eyes were scanning the room with barely concealed panic. I sat beside Henry, dressed in navy and steel, professional, composed. Behind me sat Amelia, Rachel, and Liam, along with 3 other former employees who had come forward at the last minute. They weren't testifying, but their presence was enough. The judge called the session to order. Henry stood first. His voice was calm but cutting. He laid out the timeline with surgical precision: my tenure, the critical projects I'd led, the dismissive tone of my termination, and finally the audio. We played it. Peter's voice filled the room, smug and unfiltered. "If you don't like it here, there's the door." The courtroom was dead silent. Then came the emails, dismissive responses to concerns I'd raised. Private notes Evelyn had forwarded to Peter with phrases like, "Bianca is becoming a problem," and "let's find a way to pivot her out before year-end." Peter's defense was weak. His lawyer scrambled to suggest the recording lacked context, but the judge stopped him mid-sentence. "Mr. Manning, do you deny saying those words?" Peter glanced around, then muttered no, but no further elaboration needed, the judge snapped. The real blow came when Henry introduced a second witness, Janice, a former senior analyst who had left quietly a year ago. Her testimony aligned perfectly with mine. Ignored HR complaints, sudden demotion, and a forced resignation. She was quiet, soft-spoken, but her words were like daggers. By the end of the day, Peter's posture had changed. He sat slumped in his chair, his confidence peeled away like layers of armor. And when the judge finally ruled in our favor, declaring my termination unlawful and acknowledging a toxic work culture, there was no applause, no celebration. Just silence, the kind of silence that lingers when someone powerful falls from grace. As Peter stood up to leave, he looked at me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. What would he do now? Would he accept defeat? Or would he try to claw his way back? Even as the empire he built began to crumble, Peter didn't show up to the office the next day, or the next week. Rumors swirled like wildfire. Some said he was in hiding. Others claimed he'd been forced to resign. The truth was more brutal: his name had become toxic. Investors pulled out, clients started walking, and the board of directors, desperate to salvage what was left, announced his immediate removal. He lost everything. First, the material collapse. His personal assets were frozen pending an internal audit. The penthouse apartment in Tribeca gone, the luxury car collection liquidated. Even his personal assistant, the ever-silent Chloe, had walked out without a word. Then came the reputational blow. The media caught wind of the lawsuit, headlines exploded. CEO fired amidst employee testimonies and leaked audio. Interviews I never gave were plastered across websites, but the message was clear: he was finished. And finally, the deepest cut: his isolation. The same board members who once praised him avoided his calls. Evelyn, the iron-willed HR manager, quietly tendered her resignation and moved states away. And his wife, she left him. Filed the papers the same week the court verdict went public. I saw him once more weeks later outside the courthouse. He looked smaller somehow. Sunken eyes, shoulders slumped beneath a worn blazer that had lost its sheen. He approached me hesitating. Bianca, was it worth it? I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. It was never about worth, it was about truth. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then lowered his eyes. No retort, no apology. Just silence, and that was all I needed. Because justice had finally spoken, and Peter Manning had finally learned what it meant to lose everything. It's strange how silence changes after victory. At first, it was heavy, uncertain. Now it's peace. A quiet that doesn't ask for permission. That final day outside the courthouse wasn't just the end of Peter Manning, it was the beginning of something else, something better. I didn't go back to Manning Enterprises. Even though the board, desperate to repair the damage, invited me to return, with a promotion no less, I declined. I thanked them politely and walked away. Because I didn't want to fix what was broken. I wanted to build something new. 6 months later, I opened my own consultancy, Equipath. A place where ethics weren't just talked about, they were practiced. Where employees had voices and those voices mattered. Amelia came on as head of operations. Rachel led culture and people development. And Liam, he handled corporate training, teaching executives how to listen before they lead. We weren't just rebuilding careers, we were rebuilding trust. Sometimes former colleagues drop by, eyes wide as they step into the sunlit office filled with plants, open doors, and quiet conversations. They always ask the same question. How did you do it? And I always smile and say the same thing, one truth at a time. On the wall near my desk, there's a single framed photo. It's not of the lawsuit or the courtroom or any public win. It's a still image from the day I first walked into that empty office to gather my things, holding my phone, recording everything. A reminder not of the fall but of the moment I decided to rise. And next to it on the shelf sits a small engraved plaque. A quote from my mother, something she once whispered to me when I came home in tears after a rough day at work. Power isn't what you take. It's what you refuse to give away. That line lives in me now, because I didn't just win a case, I reclaimed my voice. And maybe, just maybe, that's how revolutions begin, not with fury but with a woman, calm and steady, choosing truth over fear and never looking back.